What's up guys, Vylocity from Pitchfork Academy here, back with another Unreal Engine 5 material tutorial, and in today's video, I'm going to be showing you how to create a rotating galaxy skin material using cube maps and animated textures along the edge to enhance the effect. There's a chance you may have seen a rotating galaxy skin in a game like Fortnite, and Call of Duty also has a version of the galaxy skin as well. I also created a version of the rotating galaxy skin for our game Skyblocker, which is Pitchfork's first officially released game, so it'd mean a lot to us if you guys went and checked it out on Steam. We implemented a system to be able to unlock new skins by doing simple challenges from building your towers. You can select from a ton of different cool materials, and of course we have the galaxy one right here. This one happens to be my favorite, but if you see any of these other ones that you find interesting, just let me know down below in the comments and maybe I can make a tutorial on one of those as well. Just before we get started, I wanted to let you know that my Patreon is now live, and for a limited time, it's 50% off. You can join Vylocity's Vault for just $5 a month, and as long as you subscribe before the end of October, you'll be locked in at that legacy price permanently. Vylocity's Vault includes project files for my materials and graphics tutorials, with new ones added every week. There's also an ultimate tier if you'd like a little bit more guidance, and you can schedule a one-on-one call with me to go over your art style, material setup, or anything graphics related. Alright, let's get into the tutorial. Alright, so I'm just in a default version of the Unreal Engine 5.6 third-person template, but this will work in any version of Unreal Engine as it's just a material. So the first thing that I want to do actually is go ahead and just get out my character or the mesh that I want to put the effect on. So I'll find the characters folder, mannequin, and I'll go to meshes, and I'll just drag out the Quinn skeletal mesh, rotate a little bit. And then I'll also go ahead and add the content pack for the first person template. That way we can just see how it looks on a weapon as well. So you can just click add here, and then I'll go up to add feature or content pack, and it should be selected on first person. And I'll just click add to project. It might take just a second and close out of that. And then in my content folder, now I should have the weapons, and I'll go to the rifle meshes, and then I'll just drag out the static mesh. Bring it up a little bit and set it like that. Now that we have these two meshes, we can go ahead and go back to our content browser. Now let's head over to the website that I have linked in the description to find the space cube maps. This is called spacespheremaps.com, and these are really, really awesome cube maps. I have a link in the description as well, and at the top right of the video for my Galaxy skybox, where I show how to incorporate these in Unreal Engine and sort of make a galaxy sky. So if you're interested in making a galaxy environment, definitely check that video out. But you can pretty much choose from any of these categories. I'll just pick the multi-nebulae sphere maps there. And then I like the one at the very bottom, but these are all awesome. I just like the one at the bottom because it has some nice bluish tones. It's not super dark like the others, and there's quite a few nebulas. So I'll just click download HDR, and it will go ahead and download it. And then once it downloads, you just want to basically drag that into your content browser. So I'll browse to that, and then I can minimize the website. And let's go ahead and make a new folder in our content browser. So I'll right click and I'll make a new folder. I'll call it materials. And then inside of materials, I'll right click and make a new folder. I'll call it skins. Maybe you want to have more weapon skins. You can organize it this way. And then I'll just make a folder in here called textures. And then inside here, I'll drag my HDR. So here's the HDR. I might just rename it. Since it is a texture cube, I'll call it TC underscore nebula. Well, now that we have that, we can go ahead and go back to our skins folder. And then I'll just right click in here and make a new material called M underscore skin underscore galaxy. Now we can go ahead and open up the material and start creating the effect. I'll full screen this, and I'll right click and search for texture cube. And it's the texture sample parameter cube, and I'll call this cube map. And with this highlighted on the details panel on the left, we can go ahead and search for nebula. I think that's what we named it. I could have named this galaxy just for consistency, but this will be okay. So now that we have that in there, we can drag off of RGB and search for a multiply. And we'll get a scalar by holding S on our keyboard and clicking, and I'll call this emissive intensity. And I want to set the default value to be 15 or something, a little bit higher. That way it'll brighten up our cubemap because it is quite dark. Now we can just plug this into emissive color, and you'll see we'll get an error because since it is a cube map, we need some UVs, and the UVs will be a reflection vector world space. And as you can see here, as I rotate this around, whoops, it does have an interesting effect, but it's not quite the looking into a galaxy effect that we're going for. But this is a cool effect that you could experiment with leaving how this is. It sort of will stretch the material across the surface in a unique way, but it's not the effect that we're going for today. So we'll add a little bit more logic here on the left to make it look like we're looking into the galaxy, and also add some rotation to that. So we can right click and search for time. And then from time, we want to multiply by a scalar value of name rotation speed. And I'll set the value to be pretty low, so it'll be 0.002. It's quite a sensitive number, as you'll see when we mess with it in the material instance. From here, we need to do a little bit of math to get the X, Y, and Z in the right sort of orientation so that it works correctly with when we rotate it over time. So we need to get a cosine node. That'll be for the x-axis, and then off of here, again, we'll search for sine. So we have cosine and sine. From the sine, we want to invert this by searching 1 minus. And then we need to add these together or append to them. So I'll right click and search for append vector. And this takes two inputs and sort of separates them by a comma, if you want to think about it that way, and then outputs them as 1. So this will be our x, this will be our y, and then this is x comma y. And then we need to get the z, so I'll copy and paste the append node, and our a will be the x and y, and then our b will be the z, but we'll actually add a parameter here, so I'll hold S and click, and I'll call it rotation tilt. 0 default is fine, we'll plug that into there. And this will allow us to tilt the axis of the rotation a bit to make it a little bit more interesting when we see the rotation. It'll kind of rotate diagonally, and it'll look quite cool, but we'll leave it at 0 by default. And then after this, we need to drag off and normalize this. And then from here, we can finally plug it into custom world normal. And now when we look around in this preview sphere, you can see the effect sort of starting to come together. Now it looks like we're actually looking through into a galaxy, which is what we're looking for. All right, from here, we can go ahead and set the base color to be black. So I'll just hold 1 on my keyboard and click for a constant value. And I'll plug this into base color. And now it looks a little bit better. And here's where you can actually make a decision if you want to have reflections and make your skin also look shiny. You can leave the material blend mode on opaque and shading model default lit, or you could set it to be unlit. And as you'll see, it'll deactivate these first 5 nodes and quite a few others because it won't any longer reflect light or receive any of that. And now it's just going to be emissive, which is a pretty nice effect, and it will be more performant. However, if you do want it to be a little bit more interesting and you do want reflections, you can leave it on default lit. So I'll do that now, and then I'll just convert specular to a parameter. I'll set the default value to 0.5 and roughness, promote to parameter, and default value can be 0.1. That way it'll be nice and shiny for our sphere or our material. And then from here, we can first select all of these nodes and just click C, and I'll call this rotation logic. And then now we want to add the edge effect. So we want to add a texture and sort of edge brightness effect that looks like sort of smoke or some texture moving through the material, but only on the edge. So to do that, we want to right click and get a camera vector world space. and also a pixel normal world space. And then we want to right click and search for dot product. If you hold Control and Alt on any of these nodes, it'll tell you the math behind this. As you can see here, it computes the dot product or the length of the vector onto one another. It gets sort of where they meet. And then this will allow us to get a Fresnel, which is what it's commonly called. If I right click and preview the dot product, you can see that the inner is quite bright and then the outer is darker. We actually want to invert this effect, so I'll stop previewing this node, drag off and do a 1 minus. And now if I preview this, you'll see it's inverted the effect. However, it looks like it's a real small dot in the center and then it's bright on the edge, or really bright. So we want to control that based on a moving animated texture. So we'll have some parts of where the texture is be a little bit pushed out to the edge more, and some a little bit more to the inner face. I can stop previewing that, select these, click Q just to organize it a bit. And then from here, we want to get a power node. And then we can hold L and click for alert. I'll plug this into here. So instead of just putting one value into the exponent, we're going to have two values, with the alpha being our animated texture. So to do the texture, we'll just right click and search for texture sample parameter to D. I'll call this edge texture. And then I'll set the default texture to be a noise. You can use any noise or any cool texture that you might have. As long as it has some detail and variation, it should work. I like this bottom one here. It's called Tiling Noise 05. It should be in the engine by default. So I'll click that. And then from here, we want to do something to the UVs. So first we want to be able to scale this texture. So I'll hold U on my keyboard and click, or you can search for text coordinate. From here, I want to drag off and multiply by a scalar value, and I'll call it edge scale. Default value can be 1, so there's no change. It just uses the default scale. And then we need to right click and search for a panner node. This allows us to animate the UVs of our texture along the X and Y axis. So our UVs will go, or our text coordinate will go into coordinate. And then we need to basically feed in two values into this one value. So similarly how we did the append here for the X and Y, and then the Z, we need to do it down here for the X and Y. So I'll right click, search for append vector. The output goes into speed, and then we can copy edge scale down. I'll call this edge speed X and edge speed Y. The default value for X can be 0.025 and Y can be 0.05. Plug these into A and B. And then this goes into the UVs there. And then off of R, we can put it into alpha and bring this up a little bit. So this is now our mask between two values. So where this texture is black, we have the A right here. And where this texture is white will be whatever we have in B. So I'll just hold S and click for a scalar. I'll call it edge inner. I'll set this value to be 5. Copy and paste this down. And this value can be, well, first we got to rename it. Edge outer. This value will be 0.5. Going to B. And then from here, we can drag off and multiply. And this is just sort of a final contrast that we can apply. So I'll hold S and click, call it edge contrast for this scalar parameter. And I'll set the default value to be 2. Now if we preview this by right-clicking, you'll see what we got here. We have our original camera vector, which again is just our, oh, I got to stop previewing this one. So this is just our edge mask here. But then we're basically going to, or what we did is we're using a power to control how far it pushes to the edge based on these two values. But we're using a texture to determine where one value should be versus the other. And since this texture is black and white and it's really noisy and we're animating it, this basically lets us see this really cool effect, which is our Fresnel or our edge mask, but with this texture sort of added on top. So it's a pretty cool effect. And now we need to add this into our cube map. But first we want to add a color control. So I'll drag off of this and saturate it. Let's just make sure that this is between 0 and 1, just to be safe so we don't get any weird values or results. And then off of here, we can multiply by a color. So I'll hold V on my keyboard and click for a vector parameter. And I'll call this edge color. I'll double click it and set the value to be maybe some purplish color. And then plug this into multiply. And then we need to add it to our emissive color from our cube map. So I'll hold A and click for an add. This will go into B. Our cube map goes into A. Output goes into emissive color. And sweet, right away we get this awesome sort of mystical galaxy effect on the edge, and our galaxy's rotating in the background. Really quickly, I'll just add a control for our cube map color. So let me just drag this back here. And then we'll stick this right before the multiply like this. We'll rename this though to cube map color. And then default value can just be white. We don't want to change it by default, but we can adjust it now if we like to match the edge color a little bit more. And that's looking pretty great. Let's go ahead and save. And then I'll just set this next to my level there. And now with the Quinn mannequin selected, we can just preview the material like so. And we can just throw it on the weapon as well. Take a second to compile. And yeah, we have the rotating galaxy cube map, which is looking pretty awesome. You can essentially look into a galaxy through our character and our weapon. Let me just really quickly set my screen percentage. So I'll click this little speedometer, screen percentage, custom override 100. There we go. Now it looks nice and crispy. I was wondering what happened there. In Unreal Engine 5, they have TSR anti-aliasing, so they have upscaling, and they like to set this value lower than 100. But just to see it clearly, you can set it to be 100. Now we see the stars in all of their glory. Pretty awesome. Now, there's a couple more settings we can change. If I go into my material, you can search in the details panel for the, well, first let me click on the root node here. Search for pixel. And there's this checkbox for has pixel animation. This is supposed to help a little bit with the blurriness using TSR anti-aliasing. It doesn't help too much, but it's a good measure to check this and just have a little bit cleaner animation. All right, now we can go ahead and create specific materials for Quinn and the weapon. Because for example, right now, this material doesn't use any texture-based, mesh-based textures. Like it doesn't use a normal map, use it from Quinn, or it doesn't have a texture for the gun. Meaning I could put this on literally anything and it will just work and look pretty awesome. But we want to add a way to add the normal map from our character or our weapon to make it look a little bit more realistic. So I'll just double click to open it up. And I will first highlight all of this and click C, and I'll call this edge color. I'll clear this search here that's bothering me. And then I'll right click and search for a texture, sample parameter 2D, and I'll call this normal. With this selected, I'll set the default texture to be a flat normal. There should be quite a few of these in your engine. I'll just use this one here. And I'll plug RGB into normal. Like so. And now if I save and go back, there shouldn't be any change because we just put in a flat and normal. So now when we create a material instance, it will give us the option to change that. So I'll right click on Skin Galaxy, create a material instance. I'll remove the _inst at the end and put MI at the front. And I don't want to actually change anything in here because, for example, let's say we wanted to have a galaxy skin for our character, our weapon, and maybe a car, but we want the galaxy effect to be the same across all of them. Maybe the same scale of the noise texture, maybe the same color tint, maybe the same rotation speed. But on the character and the gun and the car, we want to add that specific normal map. So now I'll right click on this material instance, create material instance, and at the very end, I'll call it underscore Quinn. And then I can double click to open this one up. And as you'll see, everything's disabled here. And that's good. We only want to check on our normal. Then from the normal, let me just drag this to the side. We can browse to our character's texture. So I'll just browse to Quinn and then go to the textures folder. And I'll drag in this final normal map here. And now when I browse to this material, the MI Skin Galaxy Quinn, and I put it on this material slot here, the second one, you can see now we have the normal map from Quinn on there actually working quite nicely. And we get sort of that carbon fiber texture and stuff on the chest. But if we put it on the head, it'll look messed up. And that's because Quinn uses 2 material slots and 2 sets of textures. So what I'll do is actually create another material instance of Quinn. And at the very end, I'll call it Quinn secondary. And then I'll open up the secondary, dock this next to the first Quinn. And then I only want to change the normal again. So I'll browse to this one in here. Now we have the other normal. And then this one goes on the head. And now everything looks correct. And it's using the normal map from Quinn. Now, obviously, if we put this on the gun, it's going to look messed up because it's using Quinn's normal. So instead, we're going to go back to our MI Skin Galaxy, the one that we use to control our colors and the speed. And I'll right-click that, create material instance. And at the end, I'll call it rifle. This goes on here. And then if I browse to the rifle mesh and go back a level, I can find textures. And here's that rifle normal. So if I just double click again on my rifle material, sorry, we got a lot of tabs going here, just bear with me. So we're on MI Skin Galaxy Rifle, and now I just want to drag in my rifle texture. And I'll just revert that so you can see the change. So now it looks really flat and smooth, but as soon as we put the normal texture on there, we get all that detail that the artist put in that normal map. So this allows you to get sort of your mesh's details back. Now that we have that, we can finally save that and go back to our content browser, materials, skins, and open up the MI Skin Galaxy. Drag it to the side. And now we can control how the effect looks on everything. So for example, if I turn all these on, we can begin just testing a few of them. Some of them are self-explanatory, like rotation speed. We'll just speed up the rotation. But edge contrast will control the contrast of that edge effect. Maybe 1 or 2. It's fine. I'll leave it on 2 how I had it. And the edge inner and outer is that difference between the noise texture on the edge. So if I set edge outer to be the same as edge inner at 5, you'll notice there's no texture now. As soon as they're different, now it allows them to basically look, or we get that noise texture back animated. And as you can see, if you lower one of them, it brings it farther into the center of the material. So it really just depends on what you want. On a weapon, if you're holding it in first person, you probably won't want this to be so strong. So you would want this to be a bit higher, maybe 10, 5 or something like that. That way you still get a lot of the galaxy when the player is using the weapon, and it still looks good from all the other angles as well. But for the sake of all of this, I'll just set them back to the default values. So, oh, looks like it didn't get reset there. There we go. And then the edge scale is just the scale of that noise texture. So if you increase it, it tiles more. I'll leave it at 1. The edge speeds are just going to control how fast they go horizontally or vertically. And then the emissive intensity is that intensity of the cube map itself. I think maybe a value of like 7 looks good. There's a lot of contrast there. You still get that dark abyss feeling of the empty space. But when the galaxies and nebulas come around, you can see them still pretty clearly. Rotation tilt, this is the one that allows you to make the cube map rotate at a little bit more of an angle. I'll leave mine at maybe 0.5, maybe increase my speed as well to make that a little bit more obvious. Yeah, 0.3. Now it kind of looks like it's rotating a bit. Maybe lower the tilt, 0.25. Cool. Roughness is going to control how shiny it is. I like a value of 0.1. Again, you could make this more performant by setting your material domain, or not domain, but your shading model from default lit to unlit, and you wouldn't have any of those specular or roughness, but it's just a little bit of an extra control there. And then here's where you can change out what galaxy texture you're using, what edge texture, and then the normal map, which we already discussed. And then the edge color and cube map color control the colors, obviously. So if I set the cube map to be greenish, now you can see we're tinted green on the inside, but then the edge color is a separate thing. But you can match them and get some pretty cool combinations. See something like that. So really the possibilities are endless when it comes to the color controls, which is quite awesome. I might leave blue and purple, but maybe a little bit less blue. And then we can also really quickly see how it looks on our character as we run around. So I'll just go to my character blueprint, find the mesh, go to the viewport, and then just go to my materials really quickly. So we have our materials here. I'll select the Quinn. I know that that one goes on the second one. Already looks so awesome. And then we'll get the secondary one, that one here. File, save. I'll go full screen and play. Might take a sec to load everything. It's the first time I've played in this project. And yeah, pretty awesome. As we rotate, the cube map doesn't rotate, so it looks like we're rotating through it. But I guess I shouldn't say it doesn't rotate, but it doesn't rotate with the camera. We obviously set up how it rotates over time, so that way when we're standing still, we still get quite a nice effect. And as we jump around, it looks like we're jumping through space, which is pretty awesome. All right, guys, that's going to do it for this tutorial on how to create a rotating galaxy skin material. Now, this project will be available on my Patreon, Vylocity's Vault, which as a reminder is still 50% off until the end of this month. So you got about 2 weeks to get locked in at that legacy price of just $5. This has been Vylocity with Pitchfork Academy, and I'll see you in the next one.